Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis, doing player trades today. So this is going to be fun. But also, it's already fun, Bill, because one of the standbys, one of the things I think identified us here on Kings of the North for the people watching on YouTube, and not in a good way. My yellow wall that was sort of like the color of what a baby might do when things aren't going so great is gone. And I now have a gray wall, Bill. And do you feel like this is a momentous day on Kings of the North?
It is, but I kind of miss the yellow, if I'm being honest.
That's how I always say that about great players. You don't know how much you appreciate them until they're gone. So I swear, if you want me to paint this thing yellow again, we're done. So it's staying gray.
But it was like a character on our show, though. I felt like we wrote off a character of Kings of the North when we got rid of your yellow wall.
No, yeah, murdered, definitely murdered. It wasn't like they just moved away. It's not coming back. I feel like there'd be people who'd be like, hey, "Have you watched that show or whatever? The one with the yellow wall? That's for like 20% of our identity is out the door." But we have to move on, and so we're going to move on with an interesting idea, which is player trades. You and I each came up with 5 trades to make, mostly involving Northern teams. Certainly every trade involves at least one Northern team. Most are Northern team to Northern team. Couple 3-way trades in here. Couple trades where we're trading offense for defense. Couple trade where we're trading the present for the future. It gives us a lens, Bill, a little bit of like what we think about some of our Northern teams, where their strengths are, where they are sort of in the trend line of their programs, as we went about trying to figure out who we should swap.
Yeah, it was fun and also like interesting if you like, especially trying to put myself, like into the shoes of like maybe a program doesn't have a whole lot going on this year, but has like a good player or two. But then like you start to formulate the trade, you're like, man, I don't want to give up this player. Like I still want to build around this player, even though maybe we're not playing for anything more than like a bowl trip this year. So, but it was fun. It was also, I think, instructive a little bit to learn a little bit more about the rosters that we're dealing with too. So I enjoyed it.
And it's one of these things where in the transfer portal world, this is already happening. It's just that it's not a direct team to team thing. They're one-way trades, but there would have been a world where if we had done this in November, right? Like if we did this the day the season ended and said, okay, well, what do we think teams need for next year? It's like, well, I'm going to trade Dillon Gabriel from Oklahoma to Oregon, right? That's something that you would have done. And if you just go through the North, you can find people who kind of have been traded, right? Like once upon a time, a couple of years ago, Michigan receiver A.J. Henning transferred to Northwestern. And then this offseason, Northwestern offensive lineman Josh Preeb transferred to Michigan. So that was like a player to be named later in that trade. And I had done this exercise on a previous show that I was on. And a year ago, I traded when I talked about the South. I don't do it anymore. We have to talk about what someone noted. And I took it as a great compliment. Again, as Kings of the North, not just a yellow wall anymore. You know, people are figuring this out. But a year ago, I traded Bear Alexander, the defensive tackle at Georgia, to USC 10 days before he actually transferred from Georgia to USC. So, Bill, we might be planting seeds here today that could come to fruition.
If we are, the season's going to get pretty interesting. There's some wild moves involved here. We got pretty creative with it.
Yeah. So let's start with one where as I am tend to do. I kind of broke the rules. We talk about things. Hey, let's do this, whatever. And then a trade I put out in our chat was a South team to a North team. And you were like, what are we doing? I thought we said we're not doing South. We're only doing North teams. And I was like, but, and so then we just said, well, you could do a couple South teams. So this is the bomb, right? And this is like positionally and also some present versus future. My first trade is Michigan trading 2 All-American level defensive players in Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle, and Will Johnson, the cornerback, to Texas for quarterback Arch Manning. And this is solving Michigan's future quarterback issue and present quarterback issue. And it is also, I believe, a huge move for Texas to try to win the national title this year. because they have a lot back. And to add, they lost a couple corners. I think they're okay at corner, but anybody could use Will Johnson, who might be the best cornerback in the country. And they lost like all their defensive tackles, including some All-Americans, some guys who are going to go in the first round of the draft. Kenneth Grant is huge. So this, we got dropping an arch mentality. What is your reaction to bringing Arch Manning north where he belongs?
It feels like a lot for Michigan. Like I don't know. It feels like you're hitting a hard reset for Michigan that I don't know that Michigan is necessarily interested in hitting, because you're trading. If you're Michigan in this scenario, you're trading. I think you can make an argument it's two best defensive players. Like I think that its two best players are like Will Johnson and either Kenneth Grant or Mason Graham.
Yes.
And to give both those guys up to secure your quarterback future, which is no small thing, in a year where I think Michigan still fancies itself like a playoff contender, would kind of like reset the expectations for me a little bit. So that I found that part of it interesting. You're kind of like blowing up their defense a little bit to solve their quarterback problem.
So part of this is you've got to get the Mannings' attention, right? Because the Mannings, if they don't like where their guys are going, they'll just sit out. They'll be like, no, we're not taking the Michigan trade. We demand a trade to Georgia or something. So,
did you see, not to insert a tangent in here, but did you see what Deion Sanders said this week? He was on
what did he say?
He was on a
Shedeur
podcast.
would be the second guy in the draft this year.
He was asked where Shedeur and Travis Hunter would go in the draft, and he said like both top 5. And then he said he had some ideas on where Shedeur would go, and it could be a Manning situation.
Oh wow! Well, I like that. No, I think the Mannings and the Sanders should hang out. I think that they are very powerful in the college football world. So this is, to me, this is a little bit of an acknowledgement that this year is not the end all be all for Michigan, that I was willing here to get the best quarterback prospect in the country, give up a ton. And I don't think it means Michigan can't make the playoff this year. And again, like in totality, I'm not sure this doesn't make Michigan a better team right now, while also giving Michigan its quarterback for 2025. And it's also a little bit of a belief in the Michigan defensive scheme and ability to develop talent that, as you mentioned, they still have Mason Graham. So at defensive tackle, I think they have an ability to develop defensive linemen. And then at corner, again, they have some young guys behind Will Johnson. This would be huge to lose Will Johnson. But this is maybe the most uncertain quarterback situation in the North, and you're solving it with Arch. And Texas has a starter level second-year college quarterback sitting on the bench behind Quinn Ewers. And this is a go for it for Texas. So how do you get Arch? You have to get Texas's attention to pry Arch Manning loose. But I think Kenneth Grant, this is the best offer they could get. If Arch is on the market, I'm not sure anybody in the country could top Kenneth Grant and Will Johnson.
No, I think you're probably right about that. Especially you mentioned Texas losing Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy in this draft. Two of like 4 of the top 5 defensive tackles in college football last year were Devondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Kenneth Grant, and Mason Graham, right? Yeah. So I think this would be really enticing to Texas. I guess my other question about it would be like, I don't know. And this is coming from someone who just like, from a personal standpoint is probably not as high on Arch Manning as the rest of the world is. Michigan has Jaden Davis. Like they got Jaden Davis in this recruiting class. Arch Manning is, for all intents and purposes, a freshman who's not really played at all. Their experience level is, I don't know, about the same. Are you so uncertain about your quarterback situation with Jaden Davis coming into your program as a true freshman that you'd be willing to make this trade if you're Michigan? Like I don't know that that's 100% yes.
And I do believe being on campus for a year, even though he didn't play last year, he's been around a college team, knows college offenses. I believe that would make a difference. But it's a point well taken. Like you're really punting. Like you are blowing a hole in your defense. And again, leaning on your ability to develop talent there. But maybe it's an overreaction because they're like, yeah, exactly. We got a guy. They got to figure it out for this year. You didn't make a Michigan quarterback trade. This certainly was one of my things. It's something we've talked about. We talked about in our spring preview on Michigan. We talked about the 10 most interesting players of spring. Alex Orji and was near the top of that list because this Michigan quarterback battle this spring. I was trying to find Michigan a quarterback, and I couldn't necessarily find one in the North. So then I I went arch style, man.
Yeah, no, which I think makes sense because I was encountering similar issues. I also thought that a quarterback trade would probably make sense for Michigan, but they're just limiting ourselves to the 26 teams in the North. There wasn't really one that made sense because Ohio State's not going to trade Michigan a quarterback.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you had to go, yeah, they go
Trade them a running backs coach. I don't know. Like,
yeah,
let's throw it a quarterback too.
Yeah, they go outside the North, I think, to find Michigan a quarterback.
All right. So I do think in the end we have to decide, like, would you do this trade? Do you think both teams would do it? Would you do this trade if you were Michigan? Would you give up these 2 defenders for Arch Manning?
I would not. No,
you would not. Okay.
Yeah.
Would you do it if you were Texas? Would you say, like,
oh yeah,
we're rolling, let's go. 2 All-Americans added to this defense. Let's go win it all this year. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we don't want to help the South then. Then that's probably a no-go. On behalf of the North, you are vetoing this trade. That's fair. We don't want to give it to Sark. All right. You just mentioned Ohio State. Let's go to your first trade, which involves the Buckeyes.
Yeah, so I wanted to have an Ohio State trade, and I think there's like a valid question about whether or not you think Ohio State would maybe trade for a quarterback. Like, if it could get one of the top 3 quarterbacks going into the season this year, which are probably Carson Beck, Quinn Ewers, I don't know, Dylan Gabriel maybe is the third on that list. If you get one of those 3 at Ohio State, would you do it to have more certainty at that position? I think the answer to that might be yes. But I went for like a less drastic move, I think, for Ohio State, which also needs help on its offensive line. And it has a surplus of quarterbacks as it does most years. And so I have Ohio State sending second-year quarterback Lincoln Kienholz to Minnesota for offensive tackle Ariante Ursary, who is a player we didn't talk about at all last year because anytime we were talking about like offensive line or offensive tackles or putting together our all-North teams, it was like the tackles are going to be Joe Alt and Olu Fashanu and like Talesi Fuaga and Troy Fautanu. Like those were the 4, and those were probably the only 4 worth talking about. But Ursary was like a pretty good player last year. If you look at like the Pro Football Focus does like the top returning players at each position, he was number 7 among tackles. I think he was second or third, maybe among Northern players. Had a like quietly like very solid year, like really good run blocker. He is the second best run blocker among returning offensive linemen this year. And I think like overall grade maybe in the top 10. Like he's a really solid player, experienced player. He's started for 2 years at left tackle for Minnesota, and I think Ohio State just needs more certainty on its offensive line. It's still trying to figure out exactly if it has what it needs at the tackle position. And I think if you had a player like Ursary, you can kind of just put him at left tackle. You can maybe move Josh Simmons to right tackle. You can have a battle between Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer. You can kind of isolate right guard if you want to. It just gives you a guy at a tackle position that you know can play at the Big Ten level. And I don't even know like if Ohio State is 100% certain that it has it at the moment. And to get it, they're giving up a guy who is, I think, at best going to be like their number 3 quarterback this year in Lincoln Kienholz. And frankly, like it's hard to see a path forward for him to ever being Ohio State starter. Meanwhile, he's really talented and he's from North Dakota. He's like a regional player kind of from Minnesota. And I think Minnesota would jump at the opportunity to kind of build its program around the guy who has 4 years of eligibility left, who was like very high-end 4-star prospect, has a ton of athletic upside at the quarterback position.
Hey, Bill, it's PJ Fleck. I heard you got a trade for us here at Minnesota. Row the boat.
Yeah.
So you want to take our right tackle, our tackle Ursary, who's going to solve Ohio State's tackle issue, right? So Ohio State can make a run for the national title. Row the boat, right? Is that what you're saying? Row the boat.
That's right. Row the boat. Yes, sir.
Right.
Yeah.
And am I to understand that your offer is the 5th of Ohio State's 5 quarterbacks? Is that what you're doing here? Just because he happens to be from a state that touches Minnesota? Row the boat. What are we talking about here, man?
Is he the 5th?
Long term. So it's Will Howard and Devin Brown this year. And then the 2 freshmen are Julian Sayin and Aaron Noland. So if you're asking if he's the 5th, row the boat, PJ Fleck here, I'll take Julian Sayin in this trade instead.
Yeah, you're not getting Julian. No, absolutely not. You're not getting Julian.
So he's not the 3rd. All right. So I want Kienholz and Aaron Noland then. I want both to make sure I get one that hits. I am solving your tackle issue.
I would do that.
You'll give me both? Yeah. All right. If you give me Kienholz and Aaron, because you know what? Once they're here, I don't care where they're from. Row the boat, right? Don't sell me on this North Dakota stuff. He's from North Dakota. Everybody can drive over and see him play. Not working.
But you're not going to take Will Howard if you're Minnesota because he has 1 year of eligibility left. You're not going to take Devin Brown because he only has 2 years of eligibility left. And also 3 years from now, if we look back and say Lincoln Keenholz is a better college quarterback than Will Howard and Devin Brown, would that surprise you?
I am not as high on Lincoln Keenholz as some people. I mean, I think he's obviously a great athlete. But it's so early in it so far. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
Now, again, this guy, he was committed to Washington before he came to Ohio State. So like here at Minnesota, we aren't winning recruiting battles with Washington for quarterback. So this is probably a higher rated quarterback than we could get ourselves in recruiting. But I'm giving you a slam dunk tackle. Slam dunk. Problem solved. Best tackle on Ohio State's roster the minute he gets to Columbus. Yes?
Yes.
All right. So I need more. So if you give me the two, we'll play Max Brosmer at Minnesota this year. We'll let Keenholz and Aaron Nolan battle it out and see what happens. Then I'm okay with it.
Would you? So initially I had this as Ariante for Erich because I thought that was funny. But then I switched it because of the North Dakota thing, which might have been misguided. If it was just Aaron Nolan, would you do it?
I would probably want a little something more either way. Maybe throw in the 7th best Ohio State receiver. And
how about
go ahead.
Aaron Nolan and Carson Hinsman.
So now it's for real. Just because he's from Wisconsin,
he
lost his job. So a center here at Minnesota, we can find centers. We can't find the types of quarterbacks and receivers that Ohio State's played. I'm not hearing Jeremiah Smith. We'll do Ursary for Jeremiah Smith straight up.
You're not going to. I can promise you that.
Do you think we get to the world in college football where, like, if your employees can be traded, right? It's like Jeremiah, congratulations on signing with Ohio State. Pack your bags for Minneapolis, baby. We needed a tackle.
Here's an oar. See you later.
He'd row right back to Miami. All right. So this deal on its face, no, but if it's Keenholz and Aaron Nolan, or it's
you want a sweetener.
Yeah. I want a sweetener because this is right. It's a sure thing. And this is, again, a year ago on the other show that I was doing, one of the number one things we were doing is trying to find a tackle for Ohio State. I think I might have traded. I think I might have traded like Emeka Ibuka to Oregon State for Taliese Fuaga, right? It's like people have been trying to solve Ohio State's tackle issues, or at least find certainty with Ohio State's tackle issues for 2 seasons. And here we are. It's the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I tried to, this was the first one that I formulated as I was going through it. And at the time I was trying to keep it within the northern parameters. But like, if you took this outside of that, I would trade like Emeka Ibuka to LSU for like Will Campbell, or trade him to Texas for Kelvin Banks. Like I would do something like that. If you're going to tell me I'm going to get one of the 3 best tackles in the sport, I would take that kind of swing too, because Ohio State's not really hurting for receiver talent, even if they're young at that position. Otherwise,
Emeka, really, thank you for the dedication of sticking around in Columbus. Get ready to go to the Bayou.
Yeah.
Brian Kelly speaks with an accent sometimes. Okay, so this is an interesting one. We'll get this one done one way or the other between the Buckeyes and the Golden Gophers. All right, when we come back, we've got some 3-way trades to talk about, and a lot of them involve Boston College. We'll do that next on Kings of the North. Back on Kings of the North, more trades coming for you. We have an Iowa State trade. We have an Indiana-Notre Dame trade. So some people right down the road making trades. We have a couple for Cincinnati. We have a Colorado is involved with something. Oregon's involved with something. Rutgers is involved. Got some Penn State stuff coming, Northwestern. So more trades coming your way. Quick shout out here as we record on Monday morning to the 3 of our teams that reached the Sweet 16 in the men's basketball tournament. That's Purdue, Iowa State, and Illinois. If you didn't watch it last week, I did the best combos, football and basketball in the North. I direct you to that show because Iowa State, man, like Iowa State's getting it done. The men got through. The women for Iowa State as a 7 seed lost in a tight one to Stanford, but still a great basketball season for Iowa State after a strong football season. And then this is one of those, again, it's like, we're not this show, Bill, but geography is geography. Marquette, Creighton, UConn, and Gonzaga also made it. So 7 of the Sweet 16 from the North, 3 our northern teams. That'd be a heck of a thing. Kind of want to claim UConn. Like, I don't know, we want to rope UConn into this. They are, wow. So I was,
I don't want UConn's football team, but I'll take the basketball team.
I think I might want UConn's basketball team as a football team. possibly. Holy guacamole. I saw them in person on Sunday because my daughter, as people may know, is a student at Northwestern, and she's a huge basketball fan. So she and I went to Brooklyn to watch, they're in the North, to watch Northwestern play. They won in overtime against Florida Atlantic on Friday. And then we were like, okay, hey, maybe we'll get an early game. And we got the 7:45 tip. And so we got out of Brooklyn. We left our parking lot at 10:25. It's about an 8.5 hour drive back to Columbus, Ohio. So you do the math on that. Like, we started a show at 9:30. So like it was a through the night kind of thing. But sometimes when you're watching your teams, you got to do what you got to do. So my daughter had a wonderful time, and we did not see any deer on the highway, which is good. Right when you're, again, do they have deer in the South? Do you know? Or is it like Australia where everything down there's kangaroos? I don't know. Have you
I don't think they have kangaroos down there.
No. I don't know much about the South.
It was an uneventful drive back. I always get nervous about that. Like when you're making a decision like that, like the drive back is going to be a nightmare.
No, it was no weather issues. My eyelids did not get heavy. I stopped and got a 76-ounce diet soda, but didn't see any deer. So we saw the deer signs, but didn't see any deer. So we should go on a road trip to the South sometime, see if they have. I'm pretty sure they have kangaroos in the South. It's just a little bit different down there. Yeah. You also pointed out to me this week that an account has noted my love of the North. And my disdain, maybe is the nice word, for the South when it comes to these discussions. And they compared me to a great American.
They did. It was Specialist is the account on Twitter. And they said, Doug Lesmerises, when it's time to talk about talk about college football. And then it's just a picture of Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah. So my middle initial is not S, but it is now. So, and you may refer to me as General at any moment.
S of course standing for South Kent Grant.
And at some point, that's what we should do. We will, anytime the North beats the South in a game, we will reenact like Lee handing over the surrender documents at Appomattox or whatever. It's like, hello, on behalf of Jim Harbaugh, thank you, Coach Saban. Here's the
I like the idea of doing.
I shall never surrender. You will not be receiving those documents from me.
After the North wins the national title again this year, doing like our season wrap-up show at Appomattox Courthouse would be very
in full regalia, in our blues, in our northern blues.
That's right.
With swords. So, because again, I mean, there's a thing. We're a little bit more like, right? Like we're the sort of like winter coat, like old medieval stuff, but people want to make Civil War comparisons. We're not going to stop them. Okay, let's talk about some 3-team trades. We had some similar things in mind here, and one of them, and I will say there's a lot of good, obviously great Northern podcasters and writers who are out there covering teams on the ground. We're going to have more of them on the show. Some teams have more than others, but I know there's a guy named AJ Black who covers Boston College, who I certainly have been consuming a lot of his content. And he was making a point on one of his podcasts, I think it's a Locked On Boston College podcast, about the depth of Boston College's receiver room this year. And you and I both leaned into that a little bit. And we both wound up with 3-team trades involving Boston College because we think they have something to spare at the receiver spot. Let's start with your trade, Bill. It's a West Virginia, Wisconsin, Boston College trade.
Yeah. So I was thinking about, I wanted to get West Virginia some help in the secondary. We talked about that. Yep. I think maybe it was that last week's show we were talking about that.
Yeah.
Kind of reworking that a little bit. They have to replace like a really talented player in BD Bishop. One of the best corners in the North this year is going to be Ricardo Hallman at Wisconsin. I was really impressed with him last year, watching him against Ohio State. But he had a good season, like kind of overall. So I thought that'd be a good fit for what West Virginia is looking for. But then he kind of had to like the finesse how you get him there, because I wasn't sure there was like a 1-for-1 between West Virginia and Wisconsin that would have made that happen. So I involved Boston College too. And I took the conversation with Wisconsin, like wanting to get some more skill, getting a little more explosive. So what I have here is West Virginia gets Ricardo Hallman, cornerback from Wisconsin. Wisconsin gets Jaheim White, one of West Virginia's 2 running backs, probably the more explosive of the pair, he and CJ Donaldson. It also gets Boston College receiver Lewis Bond, who would like immediately show up and be the most explosive receiver that Wisconsin has. And I know we talked about them having like Will Pauling back, like to pair, like have Will Pauling in the slot. Lewis Bond can play inside, outside. He had more yards after the catch, and I think he had double the amount of yards at the catch than anybody on Wisconsin's roster had last year. That with like a passing offense that wasn't terrific at Boston College. And then to give that up, Boston College gets Wisconsin quarterback Mabry Matauer, who's a true freshman coming in this year, 4-star prospect, like borderline 4-3 some places from the state of Texas. And then also gets West Virginia linebacker Josiah Trotter. So it's like kind of like Boston College giving up maybe its best offensive weapon this year, but getting a young quarterback to build around. I think like an exciting young defender to build around. Wisconsin gets a little more explosive, and West Virginia like solves a need with a really good cornerback.
So I like almost all the parts of this trade. I like Bill O'Brien getting a young quarterback to work with. I like West Virginia shoring up its secondary. I like Wisconsin getting an explosive receiver. My pause is on West Virginia giving up Jaheim White at running back. Yeah. Jaheim White last year, starting in November, these were his 4 games in November last year for West Virginia. 16 carries for 146, 9 for 39, 21 for 204, 17 for 133. And I feel like Jaheim White is a pretty primary part of this West Virginia team that we believe is a Big 12 title contender that I have put in my initial playoff field. And I don't know that I would rather give up CJ Donaldson. There's some of this. I did the same thing here, though. Whenever you see a team that has 2 running backs, right? It's like, hey, it's the world. Everybody, 2 running backs is the way to go now. And as soon as you see them, I'm like, split them up. Yeah. Let the one guy carry it 30 times a game. Who cares? Use your backfield strength to help you elsewhere. I would have a hard time with West Virginia giving up Jaheim White. I'm imagining you had pause as you made this trade.
I did. I nearly had it to be CJ Donaldson, but CJ Donaldson has some injury stuff, and as does Ches Malusi at Wisconsin. And I thought to myself, like, if I'm Wisconsin, am I taking on another running back with injury concerns and I'm trying to bolster my backfield? And I thought the answer to that would probably be no, because it does feel like in this scenario, like Wisconsin is the one that's dealing from strength the most with like what I think maybe is the best player in this entire trade, Ricardo Holman. So I thought it would have had the leverage like to say no to that and ask for something better, because I do think Jaheim White is probably their better running back. Certainly they're more explosive running back at West Virginia.
Yeah, this is great. Like Wisconsin, I think, again, there's a couple trades here where we're doing this, where we're taking sort of like defensive oriented teams and trying to find explosive offense for them and being willing to say, okay, you're giving up maybe your best defensive player or one of your best defensive players, but you're getting guys that you don't have on your roster, that you have not been able to find on your own. So Wisconsin out of this gets this is now their number 1 running back and their number 1 receiver with Lewis Bond from Boston College and Jaheim White from West Virginia. So it's a great trade for Wisconsin. I like building something with Boston College. I think I'd say no from the West Virginia standpoint, though.
Yeah.
I like the thought process because we've talked about what they lost in the secondary, and Ricardo Holman becomes a guy who now is going to be able to, right? You're losing an All-American corner in Beanie Bishop at West Virginia, a guy that can go out and shut down the best receivers you face. So I don't know, maybe a little finagling here to try to make this work. I love where your head's at.
If it's Donaldson, would you do it if you're West Virginia? And would you do it if you're Wisconsin?
I think I'd do it if I were West Virginia. But now I'm not sure if I do it trades are hard.
Yeah.
How do you do this? Make everybody happy. Yeah. I don't know if I do it if I'm Wisconsin, because now if I'm Wisconsin, it's like, well, Ches Malusi, and I think they got another transfer at running back. Like, are we improving that much? You're still helping yourself with Bond. And again, Bond's the best Boston College receiver. They brought in a couple transfers, but he's their guy who was there last year. He's their number 1. So this is a big give up by Boston College as well. So we can keep working on this. The trade deadline isn't in for like 7 months or so. So there's time to work this out. So I think you got to keep the 3 general managers talking, keep them on the phone, and we'll see if we can figure this out. My 3-team trade also involves Boston College, and it also involves Boston College giving up a receiver. But the receiver that I have Boston College giving up is Jaron Bradley, who is a transfer from Texas Tech, who is probably now the 2nd best receiver in their room behind Lewis Bond. But my goal here again is a couple fold. One is to get Northwestern some more explosive skill guys. So in this 3-team trade, it's Boston College, Penn State, and Northwestern. Northwestern is getting Boston College receiver Jaron Bradley and Penn State quarterback Bo Pribula, who is the backup at Penn State and slots in immediately as Northwestern's starting quarterback this season. Do you have any doubt that Bo Pribula would have the ability to start for a Big Ten team this year, Bill?
No, not at all.
So I like this trade a lot for Northwestern. Penn State is giving up Bo Pribula, and Penn State is also giving up in this 3-team trade running back Nick Singleton, who is one of their 2 running backs with Katron Allen. They're a great 2-headed monster. I'm cutting one head off the monster, and I'm sending that head to Boston College. Nick Singleton goes to Boston College in this trade. Boston College running back Kai Robichaux comes to Penn State. But the big thing for Penn State is Xander Mueller. It was like, I think, 3rd team all Big Ten last year at linebacker for Northwestern. He becomes, I think, a tackle machine in the middle of the Penn State defense that lost Curtis Jacobs at linebacker, that's moving Abdul Carter to defensive end. I think you drop him in the middle of that defense and let him go to work. So what I'm doing here for Penn State is giving up one of the 2 great tailbacks to sort of give a guy who's going to be at the heart of a very good defense. And I'm getting Northwestern probably a number 1 receiver and a starting quarterback. So how do you, and then Nick Singleton goes to Boston College, you drop him in the backfield, and now you have a 2-headed rushing attack there with quarterback Thomas Castellanos and Nick Singleton at running back. What do you think?
Yeah, I like it. I don't know. I guess if I'm Penn State in this scenario, I'm questioning like maybe how much it's actually improving here. Like Kai Robichaux is a really good running back. You're kind of just substituting him for Nick Singleton. It's probably a wash, maybe in that scenario. And I do think linebacker is like somewhat of a need for Penn State, but I don't know. Like I think they have some guys that they like, even though they are moving. Abdul Carter, like Kobe King is still there. I know they like Tony Rojas. Dom DeLuca, I think, can play linebacker, although he's probably more of like a Sam Nickel than he is like an in the box kind of linebacker. So I don't know that they're like hurting there so much that they would want to give up Singleton and Pribula. And I also wonder, like, if you gave James Franklin and Andy Koltonicki truth serum, which of those 2 would be harder to give up? Because I think the answer might be Bo Pribula with like what Koltonicki has done as like with 2 quarterbacks at Kansas and like Pribula's athleticism and running ability as a compliment to Drew Aller. Like I actually kind of feel like they have some pretty interesting designs for Pribula in this offense this year. And I wonder how much they might hesitate to trade him in a scenario where I don't know they're getting like slam dunk upgrades at key positions.
I thought you were going to say if you gave him truth serum, would they trade Drew Aller instead of Pribula? I was like,
yeah, maybe. No,
wow.
I don't think they do that.
That's the world we're getting to. Out of nowhere, bomb. Penn State trades Drew Aller. I don't think they would do that. But so you're a no from the Penn State. Like, are you a yes for Boston College and a yes for Northwestern in this deal?
Yeah, I would. Yes,
but you're a no for Penn State because are they really improved? Xander Mueller's a really good player. I do think he would be an upgrade from a certainty standpoint because Penn State's going to have to play a young linebacker or 2 with the guys they've lost. But so one of the things, again, I think we both did this was we looked at the surplus in the Penn State backfield. Penn State's a playoff contender this year. What could Penn State do to say, keep Katron Allen, use Nick Singleton to help themselves? So we're going to say not quite on this deal, but you have a different Nick Singleton deal.
Yeah, because I mean, I did the same thing that you did, right? Looking at that backfield and thinking you might be able to help yourself if you got rid of one of those guys. I think Katron Allen is the better of the 2 backs, but Nick Singleton is also, he's going into his 2nd year. He still has a ton of upside. I think he still will be very enticing as an addition to most programs in college football. So my trade was to send him to Stanford. This is the one trade that I had that is like outside of the North. So Nick Singleton goes to Stanford. And it's a 1-for-1 deal. Penn State gets in return wide receiver Alec Iomanner, who probably was not a guy a lot of people like knew about last year, but he was. If anybody watched like the Stanford-Colorado game, he was the guy who caught the ball on Travis Hunter's head. And like bigger receiver, like 6'2", you could put him on the outside. He had 14 contested catches last year, which was I think tied for 4th most in the country. Penn State as a team had 22. Now, part of that, I think, is the kind of throws that Drew Aller was willing to make and not necessarily a reflection on the receiver's ability to make contested catches, but still, they didn't have very many. Keandre Lambert-Smith led the team with 5. And this is like a big kind of ball winner type receiver that I think could be really useful for Drew Aller as they try to get more out of him as a passer. And like Penn State's already addressed receiver somewhat this offseason with the addition of Julian Fleming, and Keandre Lambert-Smith is back. And I know they like Trey Wallace too, but I just don't know that they have enough at receiver. Not enough to like make me kind of content with where I think they need to be on offense. So if I'm moving a piece off Penn State's roster, I think Singleton makes sense. And if I'm looking for a return, I think I'm looking at receiver before I look anywhere else.
So that was the thing as you went through Penn State and tried to figure out like, where would you want to help them the most, right? So they lose Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac at edge to the NFL draft. It's like, oh, could you maybe help them at edge a little bit? It's like, well, they have denied Dennis Sutton back, and he's awesome, and they're moving Abdul Carter to edge. So I don't know. It doesn't seem like a huge need. They kind of always feels like they have guys coming up next in the secondary. I didn't know if there'd be on from an offensive standpoint, somebody could you get him a tackle to replace Olu Fashanu, but like, do they feel like maybe they're okay there with the guys who are next up there? So it was a reminder, I thought, that yes, they have depth at running back, but they have a pretty good roster. And so I like the idea of, again, this is one of those, they already made a trade. Ohio State traded Julian Fleming to Penn State. It's the exact kind of trade we would make. Hey, Julian Fleming, he was a starter at Ohio State, but they have more guys in that receiver room. Julian Fleming's from 45 minutes down the road from State College. You send him home. He probably becomes their number one receiver. And that happened in real life. So like, this is why we do this. So, but you think that would be the place, like one more guy, right? So if you're Lambert-Smith, Julian Fleming, and one more guy now, you're really giving Drew Aller something to work with.
Yeah, I think so. Because that was kind of revealing about going through this, is like looking at Penn State's roster, and I don't like nothing like screamed at me as being deficient, right? Like there are places where they can improve. Certainly, receivers one of them. I think you're right to point to the offensive line, but I think they've recruited and developed a little better there. They seem to feel okay about what they have kind of coming up to replace some of the guys they lost. And honestly, like their defense is in a place where I just like sort of trust them to get it right. Like they recruit really well, they develop well, they have a good scheme, even though Tom Allen's new there with defensive coordinator. I think there's enough continuity to make me feel okay about that. So yeah, for me, it was receiver. It was almost like improvement at the margins kind of thing. It's not quite that, because Penn State's not like awesome at receiver and looking to get a little better. Like they have not been as good as they should be at receiver really for almost James Franklin's entire tenure. So this helps them, I think, get a little bit closer to where they should be.
And Nick Singleton is going into his third season. He had 1,000 yards his first year at Penn State. I thought more than 1,000 rushing yards, had 700 something last year. I think Katron Allen's the guy Penn State would want to keep. I also think if Nick Singleton went somewhere where he got the ball 20 times a game, he might be like a 1,400 yard back in the Power Five, like somewhere, right? So like this is like if Nick Singleton's family is watching this, we're trading Nick Singleton because we think he's good. Like it's not getting rid of Nick Singleton. It's like, hey, they have two, just like Ohio State this year with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. They have two number one running backs. What a great strength. What a great luxury. But if it's a luxury, can you use that to try to help yourself somewhere else? So, but again, it's not like Penn State's desperate. Penn State is in a good spot, man. The guys they have, Drew Aller primarily with Andy Koltelnicki as a new offensive coordinator. And that offense has got to elevate with the guys they have. And then they have to make sure that, you lose 2 NFL quality edge rushers, but you fill in, and that's kind of the expectation for the Penn State defense. So Penn State's okay if they stand pat. Tell James they don't have to make a trade. Hey, James, you don't have to make a fake trade. What are you guys doing? Don't bother me. Quit calling me, Doug.
Stop texting me. Yeah.
James, fake trade. Yeah, if that's sports information directors of the North, send me the cell phones of your coaches so I can text them fake trades, because
I do think it's possible. Because I think like Stanford doesn't have a sure thing at quarterback either. I think like in this scenario, like Stanford could say like we want Singleton and Prabula, And then if that were the case, I don't think I'd do it if I were Penn State.
Okay.
Which I think speaks to their lack of desperation.
Well, which is one of those things, again, like if you're trying to win, if you're trying to make the playoff, backup quarterback's one of your 12 most important positions, because if you have a backup quarterback that you believe if something happens to the starter, your goals are still attainable with that guy playing, that's incredibly valuable. And if we did this, I don't know, will we get to the KOTN show that is best backup quarterbacks in the North? If we did, Bo Pabula is high on that list, is he not?
Yeah, he definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah. So they feel good about that. All right. This is a rivalry trade that I have conjured up here, and it's Iowa State. And yes, they would do it. If the goal is to better yourself, it might help your rival, but the goal is to better yourself. And I'm a little uncertain about this, but we'll see what we think. So the deal here is that Iowa State has two great receivers, right? Iowa State has the two best receivers in the state of Iowa. They have Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. So I'm going to trade one of them. Again, you're looking for strength. Where can you deal from strength? I'm going to trade Jaden Higgins from Iowa State to Iowa, and I'm going to pull from the Iowa defense. Now, they're already lost one starting corner in Cooper DeJean, who might be a first-round draft pick in the NFL. I'm going to trade their other starting corner and believe they can fill in with young guys, and I'm going to trade Sebastian Castro to Iowa State, because Iowa State has a ton back on defense, but the thing they lost is TJ Tampa at corner, who also is one of the best cornerbacks in this draft. So I'm filling the biggest Iowa State hole on defense by trading from a strength at receiver. And this is just, Iowa has 12 of its 15 best defensive players back. Let's pull one of their 5 best defenders out of there to help this offense. They get a number 1 receiver.
Did you consider doing Jaden Higgins for Jay Higgins?
Oh, no, because I'm not thoughtful like that. That's good. Oh, yeah, you're just swapping the den. It's a den swap. Oh, Jay Higgins, like the Big Ten tackle leader, middle linebacker for the Iowa Hawkeyes. No. Oh.
We can start over. We're going to start the whole show over.
3, 2, 1. Yeah, we just base it on names. Wouldn't it be cool? Oh, how confusing that is. Oh, now I'm excited to watch him tackle that guy.
Just think of all the administrative work it would save both sides. You just had them 3 letters. That's all.
Yeah. Would you do this trade for either team?
Yeah, I think I would. Jaden Higgins is a guy I looked at in a few different trades with like teams that I thought could use receiver, including Penn State, including Michigan. I ended up not coming up with a trade that involved him, but I think it makes sense from the Iowa State standpoint to trade from that position of power if you're trying to elevate elsewhere, and corner is probably where I would go with Iowa State. So I think Sebastian Castro makes sense. It's just like they're both really good players. It's like like you're trading a really good player for a really good player, but even then I think there's some hesitancy involved with like, do I really want to trade? Like Sebastian Castro might be like the 3rd best corner in college football this year, and Jaden Higgins might be like a top 10 receiver in college football this year. It's like, oh, do I really want to send that guy off of my roster? So that's the only pause, but I do think both teams would be significantly upgrading at positions of need with this deal in a way that does feel fair.
Okay, good. Oh, I feel good about that.
Yeah, I think I would.
And it's one of those things. Kirk Ferentz would just, if there were trades, he'd just be going into Phil Parker, the defensive coordinator, constantly be like, "We traded another one of your guys. We gotta."
Yeah, but also Kirk Ferentz is never trading a defensive player. Look,
I know.
Explosion. We don't need that. We need more defensive.
It would be like It's like, and they'd list the starting lineups for Iowa, and they'd have 15 defenders and 7 offensive players. It'd be like, "Are you guys like? No, we're good. We have who we have." So yeah, but they need receivers. So trying to get Iowa again. I almost was going to try to get him a left tackle. Again, the trades are happening. It's like, what if you traded Caden Proctor? It's almost like Caden Proctor, like failed his physical or something. Like, when when they make a trade in the pros and then like the trade doesn't go through. So 2 months after the fact, it's like, nope, the Alabama-Iowa trade didn't go through. So they'll figure they can fight offensive linemen though. All right, so this one we're actually going to do Sebastian Castro from Iowa to Iowa State, Jaden Higgins from Iowa State to Iowa. When we come back, a couple Cincinnati trades conjured up by Bill Landis next on Kings of the North. 3-teamers are gone. Getting a little more straightforward here with our final trades. This might be my favorite one, Landis. It's a Cincinnati-Oregon trade, and I love every part of it.
Oh, interesting. I thought you might push back a little bit on it because I think there's a potential for people to view this as like an overpay for Oregon. But Oregon is gearing up to win a national title. And like the one position where I think it still needs a little help is on the defensive line. We've talked about that a little bit. I think they've lost like their 4 top defensive tackles and snaps. Like they need some help there, and they addressed it some in the transfer portal. I think to win a national title, you need as much as you can get on the defensive line. I think especially at defensive tackle. So I have Oregon sending Dante Moore, the second-year quarterback. It just got via transfer from UCLA, former 5-star prospect, who we think is going to be their backup quarterback this year, to Dylan Gabriel, to Cincinnati for defensive tackle Dante Corleone, who is one of the better defensive tackles, not only in the North, but in all of college football. Probably had not quite as good of a year last year as he had the year before. And I read some stuff like maybe the step up in competition from the American Athletic Conference to the Big 12 like might have shown something about the caliber of player that he is. Like I think he's a really good player, and I think Oregon could use a player with his skill set and talent and disruptive ability in the middle of its defensive line is like maybe the missing piece to really making a run at a national championship this year. And I don't view Dante Moore as too high a price to pay for that. Like, yes, Oregon views him as the quarterback of the future. Oregon can also go out and get somebody else, whether that's via high school recruiting or in the transfer portal. It's an enticing enough destination that it can kind of go after whoever it wants, especially if it wins a national championship. And meanwhile, Cincinnati gets a quarterback to build around for 3 years, and someone to like inject a lot of energy and excitement into its program and help them get off maybe the quarterback transfer carousel for a couple of years. So I thought this made sense for both sides, but if anyone said like Dante Moore is that's too much to give up for a 1-year rental of Dante Corleone, like I might understand that, but I would do it if I were Oregon.
I'd do it. I think this helps get Oregon over the top. We talked about, I mean, this guy might be the new Jerzon Newton of the North when it comes to defensive tackles with his level of play. And backup quarterbacks, like, it's a nice luxury, but Oregon will find somebody else, and you bring a Dante Moore home. You're bringing him back to the Midwest. He's a Michigan native who would come to play for Cincinnati. And again, a lot of this is in this fake world that we're creating. A lot of it is if some of these teams, because I have one coming up, it's like get a quarterback, like a young quarterback that maybe you couldn't get on your own.
Yeah.
So that idea, Dante Moore at Cincinnati, what are we talking about? Like, this is Desmond Ridder was awesome. I mean, Desmond Ridder is an NFL quarterback, started last year in the NFL, so that's a high bar. But if you can get Desmond Ridder 2.0, that's a great trade. So but also this is sort of like what I'm doing. This is a version of my Michigan-Texas trade. You're trading a young quarterback to get a veteran defensive tackle that helps you win right now. So I actually would do this for both teams, the Dante trade. I think it's great, man.
Yeah, cool. I'm glad you're on the same page as me, because I just think like when you're a position like Oregon is in, like you got to be willing to let it rip. Like, and even if like 3 years down the road, you're like, man, I can't believe we traded that guy. It's like, did you get a championship? Who cares? Yeah. Like you can't live in that world. I think you got to do it.
I hate in all sports talk when 3 years after a team wins a championship, people are complaining about that team now not having. It's like, what are you talking about? Like everything you say must be said with the ring thrust out in front of you. The ring. Did you see the trophy room? Yeah, we're paying the price here. But like sometimes people are like, oh man, you're there 3 years removed from the title. The title that is the whole point of everything. So go win a ring, Oregon. And I like it. See, you're helping Oregon instead of helping Texas. This is a better trade. All right, you have another Cincinnati trade, and this one involves Michigan.
Yeah, I wanted again to have a Michigan trade, but I wasn't exactly sure where I wanted to go. Like I said, I considered receiver. I considered quarterback, but like only within the parameters of the North, and like nothing really kind of struck my fancy there. So I looked at the offensive line for Michigan, which is being reworked. They're going to have basically 5 new starters. There's some guys who have played some and have had some starts, but full-time starters are kind of replacing everybody. So I'm giving Michigan Luke Kandra, Cincinnati guard, guy we had on the All-North team, like All-American, I think, caliber guard going into this season. And maybe it's it's probably true that of the offensive line positions, guard is maybe the one that Michigan feels best about with what they have coming up. We talked about them adding Josh Preeb from Northwestern, But I just kind of think you add Luke Kandra to your roster and let the pieces kind of fall where they may. Like if a guy who's more a guard ends up playing tackle because you're trying to find your best five, I think that's okay. Like an influx of all-American caliber offensive line play at a offensive line driven program like Michigan, I don't think is ever a bad thing, even if the positional need doesn't quite match up. And the cost for Michigan would be to send Jordan Marshall, who's a true freshman running back from Cincinnati, back home to play for the Bearcats. He's an Archbishop Moeller grad. It was a huge deal when they got him out of the state of Ohio. They beat Ohio State kind of head to head to get Jordan Marshall, and that's always a big deal when Michigan's able to do that. But I also don't worry about Michigan's ability to attract and develop future running backs. So I'm willing to pay that price to address a need and bring, like I said, all-American caliber talent to the roster this year.
I also like this one, but is it hurting your heart at all that you just traded Cincinnati's two best players, one an offensive lineman, one a defensive lineman, for a young quarterback and a young running back? Kind of razzle dazzle for you, Landis, right? You're just like, linemen. Who cares about linemen?
Yeah, well, listen, you got to build in the trenches. I always believe that, but you got to sell tickets too. You know what I mean? The trenches don't sell tickets. You're trying to fill Nippert Stadium at Cincinnati. You need to do that with Dante Moore and Jordan Marshall.
And also, if this show was, I'm trading the 18th best guard in the North for the 13th best tackle in the North, it's a show.
Yeah.
So, but yes, Luke Kandra, I'm glad you noted him as all North last year here on Kings of the North. So this would be, I would do this if I were Michigan. I mean, again, this is like, frankly, I'm not trying to hurt Cincinnati, but like, I don't plant this in Luke Kandra's head. Yeah. Right? Everybody in Cincinnati's like, what are you doing? Don't tell Luke Kandra there's still a spring portal window. Don't tell Luke Kandra that Michigan might need him, because this is how these things happen. Right.
Or Ohio State. Ohio State could use the services too, maybe. This
is one of those things of the transfer portal that, again, like I do think the teams matter. It's not only everything the player wants, whatever they want, whatever they get. Like, you bring a guy in, you develop him, you help him become the player he is, and then it's like, oh, Michigan's interested. So this might be, again, I keep bragging about the fact that one of my fake things came true. This might be the thing that would have the best chance to actually come true in the next 3 months, of a guy who either of us suggested could be on a roster. So Cincinnati will be making sure Luke Kandra doesn't watch this show. Okay. I'm going to do an in-state trade in the state of Indiana. And this is a Notre Dame-Indiana trade. And again, we are dealing young quarterbacks. So I am trading Notre Dame quarterback CJ Carr, who I was trying to trade to Michigan since his grandfather is Lloyd Carr, the great Michigan national championship coach. But like, as you said, Michigan has Jaden Davis, who's the same class as CJ Carr. They're both true freshmen right now. It didn't make sense. But this is a little bit, I don't want to say excess, because CJ Carr might end up being the 2 or 3 year starter at Notre Dame. He's just behind Riley Leonard right now. But again, Notre Dame's thinking playoff right now. So this trade for me is Carter Smith, the offensive tackle for Indiana, who would solve one of Notre Dame's issues because they lost 2 great tackles in Joe Alt and Blake Fisher. So they're replacing both of those. They have candidates. I don't know that they're desperate, but Carter Smith started all last year at Indiana. Again, he's a young tackle, so you get a couple years out of him. He provides more certainty than what Notre Dame has right now. I don't think we're at the point where you're thinking that Notre Dame's tackle play is going to hold back their playoff aspirations, because they have guys in the pipeline. But Carter Smith is more of a sure thing. And then Donovan McCulley at receiver is just, I think, like a pretty dynamic guy that I initially wanted the transfer portal for Indiana when Curt Cignetti came in. They got him to get out of the transfer portal. He stayed at Indiana. And just because Notre Dame kind of has a mix of guys at receiver, but I think McCulley could help him. And then we've talked about this, like this is a game changer for Curt Cignetti. If and when Indiana can get a quarterback of this pedigree, more so in real life than in this fake life, but that's a game changer. So they would be giving up a lot, but already it's year one. Curt Cignetti has some time. If you could get a quarterback like this, I was very open to the idea of trying to get the Hoosiers a young quarterback for their future.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. It's like CJ Carr is a pretty highly regarded quarterback, and you're not necessarily getting back like all American kind of players here if you're Notre Dame, but you are addressing needs that I think maybe I don't know, make you feel a little bit more secure about where you're going if you're trying to make the playoffs. So I do think that makes sense. The one thing I wonder with like Indiana, and it's not that Indiana would say no necessarily to this, but I really like Tyler Cherry, the freshman quarterback they got this year in this recruiting class, who's the same year as CJ Carr. Um, I would take them both and like have them battle it out and give yourself a better chance of having a pretty high caliber quarterback after Curtis Rourke moves on from your program. But I might, because of that, like ask for more if I'm Indiana. Like I don't know. I mean, maybe you can ask for more if you're getting a kid who I think at a time was like considered a 5-star prospect in CJ Carr. But I don't know that Indiana is like so desperate for another young quarterback that it would do this kind of as constructed. I think maybe they'd want, I don't know, another young player, even like the whatever pick whatever position you want, recruit in the 2024 class that Indiana otherwise wouldn't have much of a chance of getting. As you're helping Notre Dame answer, I think, two pretty big questions about itself as it gears up for a playoff push.
You think Carter Smith slides in as a starter at Notre Dame at tackle?
Yeah, I think he would. He was in the portal too, wasn't he? Like right after Tom Allen got fired, he was in there because there was some talk about him. He's from the Columbus suburbs. Whether or not he'd go to Ohio State, and then he just went back to Indiana. But yeah, he's like a promising young player who I think would start opposite Charles Jagusah this year, and then you'd have like 2 or 3 years of those guys kind of as your bookends on the offensive line.
Yeah. Okay. Last one. This is we've had some down the road trades. Now this is a cross country trade. This is a Rutgers-Colorado trade, and this is trying to get Rutgers couple more dynamic playmakers. We know Kyle Monangai at running back is good to go. They have the 2 quarterbacks that are going to battle it out with Gavin Wimsatt and Ethan Kaliak-Manis. But I was interested in getting Rutgers a receiver. And much like Iowa, it's the same thing as Iowa. I'm willing to take a piece out of the defense to get a dynamic playmaker. So I'm trading Jimmy Horn Jr. from Colorado. I think Colorado's okay with the guys they would have at receiver without Jimmy Horn Jr. And I'm trading defensive end Wesley Bailey from Rutgers, who is an important part of what they do. Like is one of the more, I think, disruptive edge guys in the North. But I think Rutgers could spare him with the other pieces they have there. So Wesley Bailey, edge rusher to Colorado, Jimmy Horn Jr., receiver to Rutgers. What do you think of this?
I like it. I think we talk so much about Colorado's offensive line that probably don't talk enough that they need difference makers, I think, on both sides of the line. So this helps them address that, and maybe Rutgers is getting the more well-known name here for sure, and probably the better talent in Jimmy Horn Jr. But I think if you're Colorado, you can swallow that pill because you have not an excess of talent at receiver, but I think enough there to make you feel okay, to your point. And then Rutgers gets like more explosive on offense. Now it's just a matter of, do they have anybody that can throw Jimmy Horn the ball? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I would do this if I were both teams. Yeah.
Oh, you would? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So that's the point, to try to figure out trades that that both teams could do. Do you think? I'll tell you, I've had conversations with people, and we just aren't doing a ton of this on this show right now because we think football is more interesting than rules, and players are more interesting than regulations. But talking to people about a world where, if and when players become employees, and if college football programs are more like privately run enterprises associated with the university, and you reach a point where, I was talking to somebody who's talking about the idea of like, would you somehow have a draft out of high school into college? I can't imagine how that would ever happen. But if you're changing the parameters of the relationship between players and the program, right? Mm-hmm. Players and their employers, if that's what it becomes. In every other sport where the players are employees, they sign contracts, and then as part of those contracts, the team, the program can trade your rights to somebody else. So that's not what this is. We're not all the way down the road. I don't think it's around the corner. It's not happening the next 2 years either that we get to this point. But could you ever imagine a world where that's what college sports is? Because again, I've had conversations about like, Are you at a point where if it's a private enterprise, someone was pointing out that, for instance, if you are an employee of a university, lots of times you have an option to take classes at the university. They are available to you, but they are not a requirement. They are there for the people who want it. But I know I've had people cite studies to me of like, hey, if you gave college athletes the option of whether they wanted to go to class, like a lot of them wouldn't choose to do that. They would choose to focus on their sport, and then maybe you can come back and get your degree later or something else. But if you really are changing the game in the player-program relationship, I wonder if 25 years from now, college players could get traded.
I don't think it's impossible. I think that the tie into the educational piece is what makes it a little difficult. But I have to think that we'll eventually get to the point where it's like, you play football for Ohio State University, and as a condition of you playing football for Ohio State, like, you can go to the university if you want to, but you don't have to. And then if that's the case, and it's not like you don't have to worry about like credits transferring, or if the other team has the right major for you, or what the academic calendar is when you're making a trade, then I think that opens the door for it. And I do think eventually these players are going to have to be contracted employees. And then once that happens, like, the next logical step is almost like is transactional stuff. So I think we'll probably get there, but yeah, I don't think it's imminent. I think it's probably a decade or two down the road at least.
Yeah. It's certainly more complicated, but it's one of those things where in the end it can't be, and it's not going to be, that players are paid and they have all the control over there. Like, that's not both. The whole point now is they should have control because they don't get compensation, because there's not an agreement. Once there's an agreement in place and the agreement involves money, then you're giving something up too, which sometimes what you give up is deciding where you play. Yeah. So, isn't that what everybody wants? Man, as long as we could get to a place where Rutgers and Colorado could make a trade, that's what everybody wants for college sports. That's the dream.
I think people would much rather live in the world where that doesn't happen in real life, but we can continue to have these fake conversations about them happening.
I'm going to ask every Big Ten coach and every Big 12 coach about this, like at Media Days this year. Would you guys be in favor, like at the public podium thing? Hey, Coach Prime, real quick, Doug Lesmerises, King to the North. Would you be in favor of a world where players sign contracts and then can be traded? For instance, Jimmy Horn could be traded to Rutgers. Pro or con?
I was going to say it would be cool to do like
can you imagine how much it would scream at me for that? I'd be so
do
famous. I'd be on
a story where they do the anonymous coaches and say like, hey, we won't put your name on this, but it's like, oh, I wonder which coach said he was going to trade Wesley Bailey to Rutgers. It's like, oh, it was Deion Sanders.
Someday. All right. Well, it's, stuff's changing, whether people like it or not. So we'll get to the end of the show and freak everybody out. That's the whole thing. This is a fake show. Or is it? Like that? Oh, he just ruined it. It was like, oh, it was fun when it was imaginary. Okay, so those are our 10 fake trades. Mostly here in the North, trying to help teams. It gives you a little indication of where some strengths are, maybe some areas of improvement for some teams here in the North. We'll have another show later this week. Spring football is going on. So as stuff happens in spring football, we'll keep you guys posted on the important information around that. Again, the spring games start in April. So April 13th, a bunch of games, April 20th, a bunch of games, April 27th, a bunch of games. They'll be here before you know it. And we appreciate you guys making us part of your college football fandom. And I hope you like my gray wall. Did you think how'd the wall do today, Bill? Did you think it held up its end of the bargain?
Pretty good debut, I think, for the gray wall. Yeah, we'll dress it up too. This is merely the beginning of transforming your space.
It's like you got to build with the trenches. The paint is the trenches.
That's right.
And now the dynamic skill guys are little shelves and bobbleheads.
Yeah.
Tin Lizzy is the name of this. That's a song, right?
Thin Lizzy is a band, I believe.
Oh, yeah. What's Tin Lizzy? The name of this gray is Tin Lizzy at the paint store. I don't know. It's a car in the Netherlands. It's a car in the Netherlands. Is that why?
It's just a pun, I think. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. It's gray. All right. Thanks to Mike Urostowski, our producer, for making us look good and sound good. Thanks to you guys for making us part of Northern football in your life. He's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.